The girl walked slowly down the cold, empty streets, her thin jacket barely keeping out the chill of the winter air. Her shoes were worn, with holes in the soles, and her hair was tangled from nights spent sleeping on benches or in doorways. She had learned to move quietly to avoid drawing attention to herself, because the world often ignored people like her. She clutched a small bag with her few belongings, the weight of her life pressing on her tiny shoulders. She stopped in front of a small diner that smelled of fried food and warm bread. Through the glass, she could see families and workers eating, laughing, and enjoying meals without a care in the world. Her stomach growled, a painful reminder of the hours since her last meal. She walked to the door, hoping someone might offer her a plate or at least let her sit inside to warm herself. She had done it before, sometimes with a polite smile, sometimes just asking for a glass of water. But today, the moment she stepped up, the owner looked at her, frowned, and shook his head. The words were sharp but quiet. No. Her heart sank, but she didn't show it. She nodded silently and stepped away from the door, her eyes welling up with tears that she refused to let fall. She had faced rejection many times before, but it never got easier. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at her. But it was not just the empty stomach that hurt. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being judged for who she was and where she slept. She hugged her arms around herself and started walking again, trying to ignore the ache in her belly. As she moved through the streets, she passed by other people who stared or walked quickly past her. Some looked away with pity, others with disgust, and a few with curiosity that made her uneasy. She had learned to read faces, to know when to keep her distance, and when it might be safe to ask for help. But today no one stopped. She had grown used to it, but it still hurt every time. She found a small alley, sheltered from the wind, and crouched down behind a dumpster. She took out the small sandwich she had managed to scrounge earlier in the week, and ate it slowly, savoring every crumb. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a world where she didn't have to worry about food or shelter, where she could play and laugh without fear. But that world felt far away, almost like a dream she couldn't reach. Her mind wandered to music. She had always loved the sound of a piano, the way the notes could rise and fall, creating feelings that words could not capture. She remembered hearing a melody once, from a distance, through the window of a music school. She had stopped to listen, standing on her tiptoes, feeling the music in her chest. It had been beautiful, and for a moment, she had forgotten her hunger and cold. Music had a power that nothing else could touch, a power that could make her feel alive even in the darkest moments. The thought of music made her walk a little faster. She had no piano of her own, no lessons, but she remembered the keys, the way her fingers had tapped on imaginary keys when she was younger. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would hum a melody or tap on a bench as if it were a piano. It was the only escape she had, the only thing that reminded her that she was more than just a homeless girl on the streets. As she wandered, she noticed an old building she had never paid attention to before. Through the window, she could see a piano sitting in a corner, old but still shining. The building was empty, the door slightly open. Her heart raced. She approached slowly, afraid it might be locked, afraid someone might chase her away. But the door creaked open easily, and she stepped inside, feeling a small flicker of hope. The room was dusty, with sunlight streaming through the broken blinds. The piano looked as though it had been untouched for years, but it still held a kind of magic. She walked up to it and ran her fingers over the keys. The notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they sang. She pressed a few keys, and a melody formed, clumsy at first, but beautiful in its own way. She closed her eyes, letting the music take over, feeling warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with food or shelter. For a moment, she forgot about the cold streets, the empty stomach, and the rejection she faced daily. The music wrapped around her like a blanket, protecting her from the harshness of the world. She played and played, each note giving her a small spark of joy, each melody a reminder that she still had something precious that no one could take away. Hours passed, though she did not notice. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows in the room. Outside, people walked by, some glancing at the building, some not noticing it at all. She was lost in her music, her fingers dancing over the keys, her heart lifted by the sound she created. The world outside ceased to exist, and for a while she was not just a homeless girl. She was a musician, a creator, a person who could move the hearts of anyone who listened. Eventually, her stomach reminded her of reality. She stopped playing, her fingers hovering over the keys, reluctant to leave. She looked around the empty room, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. She knew she could not stay here forever, but she also knew she had found something that no one could take from her. Music was her secret power, her escape, and her hope. She left the building, stepping back into the cold air. The streets seemed harsher now, the hunger more pressing, but her spirit felt lighter. She walked with her head held a little higher, her eyes searching for the next place where she could sit and play. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that as long as she had music, she could survive. It gave her a reason to keep going, a reason to hope that one day, someone might see her not as a homeless girl, but as a person with a gift that could touch the world. That night, she curled up in a quiet corner, her mind still full of melodies. She thought about the piano, about the notes that had made her feel alive, and about the world that had refused her a meal. She felt a strange mix of sadness and anticipation. She knew she could not stay hungry forever, but she also knew that music was her path forward. It was a path that might lead to recognition, to kindness, and to a life she had only dreamed of. As she drifted to sleep, the city lights flickered above her, distant and cold, but she imagined them shining just for her. She imagined herself playing the piano for a crowd, for people who would listen and be moved. She imagined a world where her talent could change her life. And in that moment, even on the streets, she felt a spark of hope that nothing could extinguish. She was ready to hold onto that spark, no matter what the world threw at her next. The next morning, the girl woke up in the same quiet corner she had found the night before. Her stomach grumbled, reminding her that the day would be hard, but her mind was already filled with the music from the old piano. The notes she had played the day before lingered in her head, bringing a small warmth to her cold body. She felt a spark of determination. Today she thought she would go back to that building and see if she could play again. Maybe, just maybe, someone might stop and listen this time. She walked carefully, avoiding crowded streets and noisy intersections, her eyes fixed on the building in the distance. The city was alive with the usual bustle. People rushing to work, cars honking, street vendors shouting. But she moved through it as if she were in her own world. Each step brought her closer to the piano, and with every step, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. When she arrived, the building looked different in the light of day. The sun highlighted the dust on the windows and the scratches on the walls, but the piano still shone in the corner of the room. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, taking a deep breath. The smell of old wood and sunlight filled the air. She walked to the piano and ran her fingers over the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her, inviting her to play. At first, she pressed a few keys timidly, letting the sounds fill the room. The notes were soft and hesitant, but soon she began to play more confidently. She remembered a tune she had once heard, a melody that had stayed with her even through the toughest days. Her fingers danced across the keys, and the music flowed out of her, filling the room with emotion. Each note carried her feelings: loneliness, hope, sadness, and joy. She played without thinking, letting the music guide her. Outside, people passing by noticed the sound. Some stopped in their tracks, curious about where the beautiful music was coming from. One man leaned against a lamppost and listened, his eyes wide with surprise. A young woman, holding a coffee cup, smiled and pulled out her phone, recording the girl as she played. The sound was pure and moving, and for those who heard it, it was impossible to ignore. The girl didn't notice anyone watching. She was lost in the music, feeling a sense of freedom she had never known. For the first time in a long while, she forgot about her hunger, her cold nights, and the people who had refused her a meal. All that mattered was the sound she created, the way the notes seemed to lift her spirit and touch the hearts of anyone who might be listening. After a while, she paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. She looked around and saw the man and the woman outside the window, both clearly moved by her playing. She felt a mix of fear and excitement. What if they tried to chase her away? But instead, they smiled, and the woman waved. The girl's heart leapt. Someone had noticed her. Someone had appreciated her music. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. Encouraged, she began to play again, this time with more confidence. She experimented with different melodies, letting her emotions guide her. Some notes were soft and gentle, others loud and passionate. She didn't care if the music was perfect. It was real, and it came from her heart. She felt alive in a way she never had before, and she could see that the people outside were captivated. As the day went on, more people stopped to listen. Some stood silently, lost in the music, while others recorded videos to share with friends. The girl didn't understand why so many people were stopping, but she didn't mind. She was simply grateful to be able to play, to express herself, and to feel that her existence mattered, even if only for a moment. The sounds of the piano began to draw attention from people passing through the area. A small crowd gathered outside the building, peeking through the windows, their faces filled with amazement. They had never expected to find such talent in a homeless girl, and the contrast made the experience even more powerful. Some whispered to each other, some clapped quietly, and a few even shed tears, touched by the raw emotion in her music. Hours passed, and the girl barely noticed the time. Her stomach ached, and her hands grew tired, but she kept playing. Each note reminded her of why she had kept moving forward despite the hardships. The music was her voice, her story, and her hope all rolled into one. It was the one thing that no one could take from her, and she clung to it fiercely. Eventually, the door creaked, and a woman stepped inside. She was older, kind-faced, and looked at the girl with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "You play beautifully," she said softly. The girl froze, unsure of how to respond. She was not used to compliments, especially from strangers. The woman smiled warmly and gestured to the piano. "May I sit and listen?" The girl nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. She resumed playing, feeling a little less alone. The woman stayed quietly in the corner, listening intently, her eyes never leaving the girl's hands. The music filled the room, bridging the gap between their different worlds. For the first time, the girl felt that someone truly saw her, not as a homeless child, but as a person with a gift. As the sun began to set, the girl finally stopped playing. Her hands were sore, and her body ached from standing, but her heart was full. She looked at the woman, who nodded encouragingly. "You have something special," the woman said. "Never stop playing." The girl felt a surge of gratitude. She had never experienced kindness like this before, and it gave her hope. She packed up her few belongings and stepped back into the street, her mind buzzing with the day's events. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose. She had found a place where her talent could shine, where her music could touch others, and where she could be more than just a homeless girl. That night, she found a quiet corner to sleep, her thoughts filled with melodies and the faces of the people who had listened to her. She knew she would return to the piano tomorrow, and the next day and every day she could. Music had given her a reason to keep going, a reason to hope, and a reason to believe that her life could change. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The next morning, she woke to the sound of distant traffic and the soft light creeping through the cracks of her small corner. Her stomach reminded her of the day ahead, but she hardly cared. Her thoughts were consumed by the piano, by the music that had given her a taste of something more than survival. Today felt different. She had a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness, as if she knew something important was about to happen. She left her sleeping spot and walked through the streets, careful not to draw too much attention. The city was waking up fully now, the air filled with the chatter of people, the clatter of construction, and the scent of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. She passed groups of people rushing to work, some glancing at her, some ignoring her completely, but she kept her eyes forward. Her mind was on the piano, on the melodies she had imagined throughout the night. When she arrived at the old building, she saw something that made her heart skip. A small crowd had gathered outside. Some held cameras, others whispered to each other, their eyes fixed on the window where she would soon play. She had not expected anyone to be waiting, and a wave of nervousness swept through her. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled the same, old and comforting, as if the piano itself had welcomed her back. She walked to the piano and touched the keys. The familiar feel grounded her, and slowly, her nerves melted into anticipation. She pressed the first few notes, letting the sound fill the room, and then she began to play fully, her fingers moving with confidence she had never felt before. The melody she played today was longer, richer, more expressive. Each note carried the weight of her experiences, her hunger, her loneliness, her small joys, and the hope that had started to grow within her. The crowd outside grew quiet as the music flowed through the air. People stopped their conversations, their steps, and their busy routines, captivated by the sound coming from the old building. They could not see her clearly, only the outline of a small girl at the piano, but they could feel the emotion in her playing. The music was raw and beautiful, and it made them pause and reflect, reminding them of things they had long forgotten in their own lives. A few people recorded the performance, whispering to their friends about the unexpected talent they had stumbled upon. One man even approached the building cautiously, peeking inside before deciding to stay and listen. The girl did not notice the gathering audience. She was lost in her music, each note rising and falling like waves, carrying her heart into the room and beyond. For her, the piano was a bridge to another world, a place where her troubles did not define her. As she continued playing, a passerby finally spoke, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is incredible," he said softly, almost to himself. Others nodded in agreement, their eyes misty with feeling. Some had never imagined that such beauty could come from someone living on the streets, and the contrast made it even more powerful. The girl's music was speaking louder than any words could, telling a story of resilience, courage, and hidden talent. Hours seemed to pass, though she was unaware of time. Her stomach growled loudly, and her hands began to tire, but she played on. Every note was a declaration, a statement that she existed, that she had worth, and that her life mattered. She was pouring herself into the piano, not for recognition or reward, but because she had to. Music was her lifeline, her way of surviving the harshness of the world around her. Eventually, she noticed movement outside the window. A few people had stepped closer, and she could hear the whispers of admiration. One woman, carrying a small child, smiled broadly and mouthed words of encouragement. The girl's heart lifted. She realized that her music had the power to touch people in ways she had never imagined. The crowd outside was not just watching. They were feeling, connecting, and sharing a moment that transcended their differences. Encouraged by this, she played with even more passion, experimenting with variations on the melodies she knew. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, and she felt a sense of joy that was almost painful in its intensity. Each note carried hope, defiance, and a longing for something more. She felt as though she was speaking directly to the world, telling everyone who listened that she would not be defined by her circumstances. Suddenly, the door creaked, and a man stepped inside. He was older, well-dressed, and his eyes were filled with surprise and admiration. "Your music is extraordinary," he said quietly, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. The girl paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. She was not used to compliments, especially from someone she did not know. The man smiled warmly and nodded toward the piano. "Please continue. You have a gift that the world needs to hear." The girl nodded shyly and resumed playing. She felt a surge of confidence, knowing that at least one person truly appreciated her talent. The man listened intently, nodding with every note. The crowd outside seemed to grow as more people noticed the sound, some stopping in their tracks, others pulling out their phones to record the moment. The building, once empty and forgotten, was now alive with energy, all because of her music. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden glow through the windows, the girl finally stopped. Her hands were sore, her body tired, but her spirit was soaring. She looked at the man, who gave her an approving nod. The crowd outside clapped quietly, and some cheered softly, not wanting to disrupt the fragile magic of the moment. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not just as a homeless child, but as someone who could inspire and touch lives through her talent. She packed her few belongings and stepped out into the evening air. The streets felt different now, less harsh, more alive. She could hear whispers behind her, people discussing the girl who played the piano as if her music had changed something in them. She walked carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe someone would offer her food, a place to stay, or even help her learn more about music. But more than anything, she felt hope, a fragile but growing belief that her life could change. That night, she found a quiet corner, curled up with her few possessions, and let her mind wander through the melodies she had played. She thought about the people who had listened, about the faces pressed against the window, and about the man who had encouraged her to continue. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known, a reason to keep moving forward despite hunger, cold, and the hardships of life on the streets. She closed her eyes and imagined the piano waiting for her again tomorrow. She imagined herself playing for more people, bringing joy, hope, and inspiration through the music that lived inside her. For the first time, she believed that her life was more than survival, that her gift could matter to the world, and that even a homeless girl could make a difference. Music had given her a voice, and she was ready to let it be heard, no matter where the path would lead. The girl woke up early, as she always did, with the city just beginning to stir. The air was crisp, carrying the sounds of distant cars and voices, and the faint smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Hunger gnawed at her, but it was no longer her only concern. Her mind was alive with thoughts of the piano, of the music that had lifted her spirit the day before. She felt a nervous excitement, a sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. She moved through the streets carefully, weaving between people who seemed to have no time to notice her. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others avoided her gaze entirely, but she had learned not to rely on their attention. Her focus was on the building that had become her sanctuary, the place where the piano waited for her touch. Each step brought a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. She did not know what awaited her today, but she felt an instinctive pull toward the music. When she arrived, the sight that met her eyes made her stop for a moment. A small group of people had gathered outside, peering in through the dusty windows. Some held cameras or phones, trying to catch a glimpse of what they could only hear in part. Her heart raced, and for a brief moment, doubt crept in. What if they judged her as they often did? What if they didn't like her music? But a deep breath reminded her that the piano had been her companion and her refuge, and today, it would be her voice. She opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The room smelled the same as yesterday, old wood, dust and sunlight, and it felt comforting, almost protective. She walked to the piano and let her fingers hover over the keys, feeling the smooth surface that had become familiar. Tentatively, she pressed the first few notes. They sounded soft and fragile at first, but soon, they gained strength as she let the melody flow naturally from her mind and heart. The music she created that day was different from before. It was longer, more intricate, with a rhythm that mirrored the beat of her life. Sometimes slow and sorrowful, sometimes swift and joyful. She did not think about technique or perfection. She simply let her emotions guide her. And in doing so, the piano sang through her, telling a story that words could never express. Her hands moved almost instinctively, dancing across the keys with a confidence born from a deep connection to the music. Outside, the small crowd grew silent. People stopped in their tracks, unable to ignore the haunting beauty of the sounds drifting through the window. Faces pressed close to the glass, their eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. A few began recording, whispering to friends about the unexpected talent before them. Some were moved to tears, others smiled softly, feeling the weight of emotions the music carried. In that moment, the girl's story reached them without a single word. She did not notice the audience at first, so absorbed was she in the music. Each note seemed to lift her higher. Each chord resonated with the struggles and hopes she carried inside. Her fingers ached, her stomach growled, and yet she played on, driven by a force stronger than fatigue or hunger. The piano had become her voice, her shield, and her declaration that she existed, that she had something precious to offer the world. As the afternoon wore on, more people gathered. A woman with a small child smiled and mouthed words of encouragement through the glass. A man standing nearby shook his head in astonishment, unable to believe the skill emanating from someone who lived on the streets. The girls' music transcended their assumptions and prejudices, reminding them that talent and beauty could appear in the most unexpected places. A gentle creak signaled that someone had entered the building. An older man stood at the door, his eyes filled with astonishment and admiration. "You have an incredible gift," he said softly. The girl paused, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. Compliments were rare in her world, and she was not sure how to respond. The man smiled warmly, gesturing toward the piano. "Please continue. Your music deserves to be heard." Encouraged, she resumed playing. The man listened quietly, nodding as her fingers created waves of sound that seemed to reach every corner of the room. The people outside watched with rapt attention, some leaning against the building, some standing in silent awe. The girl felt a surge of confidence she had never known. She was no longer invisible. Her music had reached out and touched the hearts of others, proving that she mattered beyond her circumstances. Hours passed without her noticing. The light outside changed from bright to golden as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor. Her hands were sore, and her body ached, but she felt exhilaration rather than fatigue. She was playing not just for herself, but for the people who had stopped to listen, for the world that had often refused to see her. Every note was a small victory, a testament to resilience, and a promise of hope. The crowd outside grew larger as more people came, drawn by the sound of her playing. They whispered among themselves, sharing the miracle of the moment. Some cried quietly, others clapped softly, and a few laughed in disbelief, overwhelmed by the beauty they were witnessing. It was as if the piano had become a bridge, connecting lives, breaking barriers, and inspiring strangers to pause and feel. Finally, as the evening drew near, the girl's music slowed, her fingers tired but still guided by emotion. She took a deep breath and allowed the final notes to linger in the room. Silence followed, heavy and reverent. The older man who had entered nodded in approval, while the crowd outside clapped, some cheering softly, careful not to disturb the fragile magic of the moment. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with food or shelter. She had been seen, she had been heard, and for the first time she felt truly recognized. She gathered her few belongings and stepped outside, the city streets illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. The murmurs of the crowd followed her as she walked, sharing stories of the girl who had played the piano with a passion that could not be ignored. Her heart was light with hope and excitement, for she knew this was only the beginning. Music had opened a door to possibilities she had never dared to imagine, and she was determined to follow it. That night, she found a quiet corner to rest. She closed her eyes, letting the melodies she had played replay in her mind. She thought about the people who had listened, the man who had encouraged her, and the small crowd that had gathered outside. She felt a deep sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward despite the hardships she faced. Music had given her a voice, a way to connect with the world, and a reason to hope for a better life. She imagined returning to the piano tomorrow, playing with even more confidence, and reaching more people. She imagined herself performing for larger crowds, touching hearts and inspiring others through the power of her music. For the first time, she believed that her life was more than survival. She had a gift, a purpose, and a path that could lead her to a future she had only dreamed of. And as she drifted to sleep under the quiet city lights, She felt a spark of hope that burned brighter than any fear or hardship that had come before. The next day, the girl woke up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The memory of the day before played in her mind like a beautiful song, and she could feel the lingering warmth from the crowd that had gathered outside. She had never imagined that her music could draw so much attention, and yet, it had. She hugged her small bag closer and stepped out into the streets, feeling the weight of possibility pressing gently against her. As she walked toward the old building, she noticed something that made her heart skip. There were more people than yesterday, some standing at a distance, others closer, all looking toward the window with anticipation. She realized that word of her playing had begun to spread, though she did not know how. Phones were raised, some people whispering excitedly, others simply standing in silence, waiting to hear the first note. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled familiar, comforting in its dust and sunlight. The piano sat in the corner, waiting for her fingers to bring it to life. She approached and let her hands rest on the keys. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. Today felt bigger than yesterday, and she wondered if she could rise to the challenge. She pressed the first few notes, soft and careful, listening to how they resonated in the room. Then, slowly, she allowed herself to play fully, letting the music flow as naturally as her heartbeat. The melody she created was longer, richer, and more expressive than before. It carried the depth of her experiences, the cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness, and the faint glimmer of hope that had begun to grow. Every note was alive with emotion, a reflection of her life on the streets and her dreams beyond them. Outside, the crowd grew silent as the sound of the piano reached their ears. People stopped walking, their conversations fading into stillness. Faces pressed to the windows, eyes wide, hearts touched by the raw beauty of her music. Some recorded videos, whispering to friends about the girl who played with such skill and passion. Others simply stood in awe, letting the sound move through them, carrying away the worries of their own lives for a few precious moments. A woman stepped closer to the window, smiling warmly. She held a small child, who watched the girl with wide eyes, mesmerized by the melody. The woman whispered words of encouragement, and the girl, though unaware, felt a subtle shift. Her music was reaching people, connecting them to her story in a way she had never imagined possible. It was a bridge between her world and theirs, built with sound and emotion. As she continued, she noticed a few people approaching the building. Some were reporters, some were ordinary passers-by drawn by curiosity and the magic of the piano. The room seemed to grow in size and energy, filled with the invisible presence of those who had heard of her talent. She played with more confidence, experimenting with variations in the melody, letting her emotions guide her fingers. Each note was a statement, a proof that she was more than her circumstances, that her life had value and beauty. Hours passed, though she barely noticed. Her hands ached, her stomach growled, and yet she could not stop. The music was her lifeline, her way of expressing what words could never convey. People outside continued to gather, some standing quietly, others recording videos, sharing them with friends and strangers alike. Social media had begun to take notice, and soon, the videos of the homeless girl playing the piano began spreading online. Comments poured in, praising her talent, expressing amazement, and offering support. The girl remained unaware of the growing attention. She was lost in the music, feeling each note ripple through the room, through her body, and into the hearts of those who listened. Her playing was no longer just an escape. It had become a statement, a message to the world that even those who are overlooked and underestimated can create something extraordinary. It was proof of resilience, of hope, and of the power of human spirit as the sun began to set. Casting long golden rays through the windows, the girl finally paused, letting the last notes linger in the air. Silence followed, heavy and reverent. The crowd outside clapped softly, some cheering quietly, careful not to disrupt the fragile magic of the moment. The woman with the child smiled, tears in her eyes, and a few others whispered words of encouragement through the glass. The girl felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, a feeling of recognition that she had never known before. She packed her few belongings and stepped out into the evening air. The streets seemed different now, less harsh, more alive. People whispered as she walked, sharing stories of the girl who had played the piano, who had touched hearts and inspired strangers. She could feel hope growing inside her, fragile yet persistent. She walked with a sense of purpose she had never felt, knowing that her life might be on the brink of change. That night, she found a quiet corner to rest, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed the day's events, the melodies she had played, and the faces of those who had listened. She thought about the videos that were spreading online, the encouragement she had received, and the possibility that someone might offer her help, a chance to learn, or a place to stay. For the first time, she felt that her life could be more than surviving day to day. She felt that her music could lead her to a new beginning. As she drifted into a light sleep, she imagined returning to the piano the next day. She imagined herself playing for more people, bringing joy and hope through her music. She imagined a future where her talent could open doors, where kindness and opportunity could replace fear and hunger. For the first time, she truly believed that her life had potential, that her gift mattered, and that even a homeless girl could change her story with courage and talent. And in the quiet city night, with the stars above, she held on to that hope, ready to see where her music would take her next. The next morning, she woke with a sense of quiet anticipation. Overnight, her videos had spread across the city, shared by people who had been touched by her music. Comments poured in, praising her skill, expressing awe, and offering help. She had not expected this. She had only wanted to play, to let the music speak what she could not. But now, she realized the world was listening, and it felt both exciting and overwhelming. She wrapped her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and made her way to the building where the piano waited. The streets seemed different today, filled with people who paused to glance at her, some whispering, some smiling. She kept her head down but could feel the change in the air. She reached the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. A rush of nervous energy mixed with joy ran through her as she began to play. Today the room was not empty. A few people she recognized from yesterday had returned, and others had joined. They listened silently, some recording, some simply lost in the sound. She felt their presence but did not let it distract her. Her music flowed freely, richer and more confident than ever. Each note told a story of struggle and hope, of nights spent cold and hungry, of small joys found in fleeting moments. Her fingers danced across the keys with a purpose she had never felt before. Outside, a crowd had gathered that seemed larger than ever. People whispered among themselves, amazed that someone living on the streets could create such beauty. Some shed tears, others smiled quietly, feeling emotions they had long forgotten. A few children stood with wide eyes, captivated by the melodies that seemed to carry magic. She did not see the cameras or hear the murmurs clearly, but she felt the energy, the connection with the people who had come to listen. A kind-faced woman stepped inside the building quietly, sitting in the corner. She did not speak but simply listened, her eyes reflecting admiration and encouragement. The girl noticed her presence and felt a warmth in her chest. It was as if someone truly understood the power of her music, someone who believed in her beyond her circumstances. This gave her courage, and she let the music soar even higher, pouring her heart into every note. Hours passed in what felt like moments. She played with passion, with sadness, with joy, and with hope. Each melody carried a piece of her soul, connecting her with those around her in a way that words never could. Outside, people whispered stories of her talent, shared videos, and praised her courage. Her music had become a message to the world. Even those overlooked and underestimated can create something extraordinary. Finally, as the sun began to set, she let the last notes linger in the air. Silence followed, heavy with respect and awe. The people inside and outside the building clapped softly, some cheering quietly, careful not to break the fragile magic of the moment. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging, a feeling she had never known. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a homeless girl, but as a musician, as a human being with a gift that could touch lives. After playing, she stepped outside, the crowd dispersing slowly, leaving her with a sense of pride and hope. People stopped to offer small words of encouragement, a sandwich, a cup of coffee, or a gentle smile. She accepted them with gratitude, her heart swelling with the realization that kindness existed in the world, even for someone like her. She had never imagined that music could open doors, but now she understood its power. Over the next few days, her life began to change. People offered her temporary shelter, food, and even lessons to improve her skill. The videos continued to spread, and more people came to listen. Local news outlets covered her story, and she was invited to play at small events. Though the world she entered was new and overwhelming, she embraced it cautiously, grateful for each opportunity and mindful of the journey that had brought her here. Through it all, she remained humble. She remembered the cold nights, the hunger, and the moments when no one had seen her. These memories fueled her desire to help others and to share her music not for fame or reward, but to inspire hope and joy. Each performance was a gift, a connection, and a statement that even the most overlooked lives could shine with talent and courage. She began to meet other musicians, people who shared her love for music and encouraged her growth. She learned new techniques, expanded her repertoire, and played with increasing confidence. But no matter how many new experiences she had, the piano in the old building remained special. It was her sanctuary, the place where she discovered her voice, and she returned whenever she could to play freely, for herself and for anyone who happened to listen. One evening, after a long day of performing for a small audience, she sat quietly by the piano, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the streets where she had lived, the meals she had been denied, and the cold nights that had felt endless. She realized that those hardships had not broken her. They had given her depth, resilience, and a perspective that few could understand. Her music carried all of that, and in sharing it, she had transformed not only her own life, but also touched the lives of countless others. Word continued to spread, and she became a symbol of hope. People from all walks of life admired her courage, her talent, and her perseverance. Invitations came to perform at charity events, local concerts, and even school programs, where she inspired young children to follow their passions despite challenges. She had become more than a musician. She had become a beacon of possibility, proof that one could rise above circumstances through talent, determination, and the willingness to be seen. Despite her growing recognition, she never lost her sense of humility. She knew that fame was fleeting, but the love for music and the joy it brought to herself and others was lasting. She continued to play, day after day, sharing her gift freely and encouraging others to find their own ways to shine. Each performance was a reminder that even the smallest acts could create ripples, touching lives far beyond what one could imagine. And so she played on. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a friend, a voice, and a bridge to the world. Through it, she connected, inspired, and healed, transforming her own life from one of struggle to one of purpose. The girl who had once been refused a meal now held the power to amaze, to move, and to uplift everyone who listened. Her journey had begun with a single melody, but it had grown into a symphony of hope, courage, and endless possibilities, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, light could shine, and dreams could come true.